Welcome to Health Systems CIO's interview with Christopher Lau, Director of Cybersecurity, Proactive Security, and IoT Risk with Advocate Health. I'm Anthony Guerra, Founder and Editor-in-Chief. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. I appreciate it.
All right, very good. You want to start off by telling me a little bit about your organization and your role?
Sure. So Advocate Health now is one of the largest health systems in the country. Recently merged between Legacy Advocate Aurora in the Midwest and Atrium Health in the Southeast. So now coming together, 50 plus hospitals, 150 plus team members, uh, research in and academia in Wake Forest, a lot of opportunity both for growth and to serve the communities and patients in our areas,
Mhm.
but also a lot of opportunity for attackers, unfortunately.
Very good. How many team members you said approximately?
About 150,000.
1,000, because you didn't put 1,000
Oh,
at the
sorry, I
end.
forgot the
Yeah,
last part. Yeah, we combined two orgs that
yeah,
were about same size,
yeah.
so it's plenty big.
It's plenty. That's a good way to put it. Plenty big. I like that. So let's start off a little bit more about your role. You got a lot of stuff in your title, which we can get into more, but tell me a little bit more about your role.
So I affectionately think of my team. We've joked about this that we're a little bit of a junk drawer, because as cybersecurity goes, right? Because there's well-defined components of cyber, right? So you have your GRC, you have the SOC, you have firewall teams, you have monitoring, all that stuff, incident response. Part of my team that's under proactive security, and that we recently renamed it to proactive security and IoT risk, is proactive security is what we traditionally have thought of as vulnerability management. Vulnerability management, and I've argued this for years, is one of the few areas of cybersecurity that's truly left of bang. That you're not responding to something bad that's happened, you're proactively identifying risk and areas of exposure, to remediate,
Hmm.
and you're very closely aligned with the business or the clinical side of the house because you need it done quickly, but you also need them to understand why it's important. IoT risk, we originally we called it operational technology risk, OT for short, but OT in the healthcare space is a little bit problematic because people think of occupational therapy, which then they're wondering why you have cybersecurity around OT. That is focused on industrial control systems, medical devices, and all of the miscellaneous stuff and junk that most organizations don't realize they have. So telecom, printers, which I hate, and cameras. Think like security cameras and things like
Hmm.
that. Anything that connects to the internet that isn't a traditional IT device. So on top of all of that, we also dig into legacy technology, so unsupported operating systems or leftover miscellaneous stuff and junk from previous mergers. We've all been in it where you get through the transitional integration and there's all this stuff that gets swept away because you right size, you do app rationalization, things like that, but then you still have all this other stuff sitting there. So that's another component. And then we're also digging into unstructured data management, which is basically the digital landfill that everybody has of shared drives. And that in and of itself is a program that can pay for itself by eliminating storage in line with retention. You eliminate cost as well, along with the risk.
That's funny. So far we've had a reference to landfill and junk drawers.
Yes.
That's good
Well,
stuff.
I don't know what else to call unstructured data because everybody has shared drives. I don't know of one person that's like, yeah, those are awesome. And it really is a digital landfill because you could have anything in there from Christmas party pictures from 2002 all the way to somebody's tax returns. I've seen it all in there.
Yeah, yeah. You were mentioning IoT. Do you separate out clinical versus non-clinical
Yeah.
IoT, and then people specialize in managing those? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we originally started focus. So that team is a baby in cybersecurity parlance. We've only been around for 3 years. Got that built and funded in a pandemic. So that I'm still proud of that. Not easy to do in healthcare, but we started off really focused on medical devices
Mm-hmm.
and looking at both vulnerabilities and asset utilization. And what we found was that both of those are somewhat dead ends. And let me explain that. Asset utilization could, if you have financial data to support it, it could help inform equipment replacement decisions. However, trying to get back to the financial component is difficult. Number one. Number two, with vulnerabilities, you're 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 so linked with the MDMs. You can't just go off and start patching things yourself, because if you broke it, you bought it. And and with that, you need to more manage the MDMs and make sure that they're communicating thoroughly, and making sure clinical engineering teams then own the the cadence for maintenance, patching, asset lifecycle, disposition, all that stuff. So it becomes more of a governance role than a true boots on the ground security role with
Mm-hmm.
medical devices. The third thing that we learned, though, as now we're transitioning to predominantly ICS and ICS focus with a secondary focus on medical devices. And I know that probably sounds strange for a healthcare system focused on this, but both of these types of systems have a long useful life. So if you've been in IT, you're familiar with the 5 to 7 year rule, right? Depending on what the hardware is, and it's probably going to be replaced. If you're really, really stretching dollars, you might go as far as 10, but typically it's gone. When you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about ICS gear and even the big iron medical devices, you're talking about an asset utilization that's 5 to 7 times that of traditional IT equipment. So you're talking about 25 to 35 years. Well, a lot can happen. And so I guarantee you, industrial control systems from the Clinton administration are not going to have the same security features that current industrial control systems have, right? On top of that, there's layers deep of components. So when we typically interface with industrial control systems, there's something called the Purdue model that outlines 5 layers of components. When we typically, our IT people, engage with industrial control systems, it's about level 3.5 of the Purdue model, which is at the DMZ, right? So all the other components, the HMIs, the supervisory controllers, the sensors, that's all at levels 3 and below. So understanding what you have, you have in a lot of cases outdated operating systems. You have Windows PCs that are running these. You have vendors that remote in for support. And honestly, you have systems that are really powering your entire operation, right? And again, this may sound strange, but if an MRI goes down, I'm not discounting how challenging that is, but most hospitals have a backup, right? Or they
Mm-hmm.
have a
Mm-hmm.
plan even from a DR perspective if that happens, or an X-ray. If your building automation system or ICS, all of the components of your ICS goes down, facilities might be able to keep that running for a short term, but if that goes down, you're evacuating. You're closing that facility. And so attackers know that. And when you start looking at attack patterns, if you start looking around the corner, a lot of ransomware attacks, I think we'll start seeing this more and more in the next couple of years, will be geared more toward ICS gear. And the reason I say that is because they know people will pay faster. You might be able to live without Epic for a while. You might be able to live without, this particular application. You can't live without HVAC. You can't conduct surgeries if you don't have temperature controlled operating rooms, right? You can't move patients if your elevators don't work. And so that's the big threat of the future, where when you compare and contrast with medical devices or infusion pumps, there's a lot of embedded custom code in that attackers generally aren't burning a lot of cycles going after a particular infusion pump's embedded custom software. They're going after the low-hanging fruit that Microsoft gives us. And I don't mean to pick on Microsoft, it's just the most common operating system.
So these systems, these ICS systems, they're so important that one would think that the security would be really tight. You would say, "My God, look how much
No,
the," right?" But that's, if you didn't sort of get into it, you would say, "Well, if they're so important, they're going to be well protected and like Fort Knox, nothing to worry about." But not quite.
not quite. And a lot of because because a lot of teams or a lot of systems, a lot of businesses don't have an OT focused security team, it falls on the IT teams. And you'll have networks that are shared, maybe not even segmented between IT and OT, where a best practice would be to have an completely separate network for OT. But you don't have dedicated incident response, you don't have dedicated network monitoring, you don't have dedicated DR plans for OT. They try more often than not to jam it into the IT funnel. And it just doesn't work because they're specialized pieces of equipment that, when you think of IT equipment, the best way I can explain it is IT gear operates in the virtual world. It operates in the digital world. It's an app. It's a system. It's a terminal. OT gear operates in the physical world.
Hmm.
So everything that the IT system impacts you, me, patients, whoever, in the physical world. The HVAC doesn't work. We
You're
feel
talking
hot.
about the OT,
The
OT.
OT, excuse me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
IT, if an application goes down, it's kind of an inconvenience. OT, you notice it.
It's really interesting. It's like if if an IT system goes down, I don't get cold.
Right.
Right, right. But if an
Right.
OT system was, I could get cold. If it's cold out, I'm going to get cold. So,
Absolutely. And what's also interesting is the CIA triad that most cybersecurity professionals know about, from confidentiality, integrity, availability, that for OT systems, that's inverted. There is no confidentiality because it doesn't really store data. Integrity, yes, you need logs to be accurate, but again, no one's reviewing that other than the vendor or the engineering teams, but you need it to be available. It has to be available 24/7, 365, and it has to operate in a safe manner. So safety and availability are the prime directives. Integrity and confidentiality fall to the bottom.
so you're kind of blowing my mind here, and it's not that I haven't heard about OT issues or things like that, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody in healthcare really that I've heard is talking about OT. Everyone's talking about ransomware. They're really focused on resilience in a ransomware attack. So that's where the sort of the cyber mind is right now. I think they've finally gotten to, from prevention and then dealing with the issue to operational resilience and clinical continuity. What are we going to do? How are we going to help prepare our organization so that patients can continue to get care? How do we have to work with emergency services to help them understand what a cyber outage could look like so that they can then do that sort of high level umbrella planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we think about that, the bad guy's goal is to put you in a position where you have to pay them money. So, they used to mess with the data, take out, exfiltrate the data. Well, that was like, okay, so what now? Almost, almost it's like, so what? Now it's like, all right, you're going to shut down all my systems. I can't deliver clinical care. You got me. But this is sort of even beyond that. Or this is, I don't know if it's worse than that, but it's certainly another element in that line, which is I'm going to do something to you that you cannot live with until you pay me.
Yeah,
And that may be, if it's the summer, I'm shutting off your air conditioning, pay me.
right.
Unless you want to evacuate your hospital. So that's really where your mind is here with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I literally get paid to be paranoid when you think about it, but I put it on par, and this is I'm being a little trying to be funny when I say this for a serious topic. It is the equivalent if anybody has a screenager at home, it would be the equivalent of taking your screenager's phone that they can't live without it, right? And they'll do anything to get it back, including mowing the lawn. But the point is these systems a lot of people don't know much about. We've outsourced support and they power everything. In healthcare, we focus on Epic or whatever your pick of medical record system is,
Right.
an EMR. We should, right? But we focus on other applications. But even if you have the best resiliency plan on the IT side, if you have no power, you have no system because you have no servers, because you have no laptops, because you have no wireless, you have nothing, right? And that's what attackers know. And we're seeing an increase in attacks on these. Now, if you get to the really sophisticated piece, and this is what I'm talking about is the most likely scenario. You get to the unlikely but possible scenario, and you get somebody, particularly probably a nation state, that can leverage malware similar to what we did with Stuxnet, we being the
Yes.
United States.
Yeah.
You could weaponize a building automation system,
Right.
right?
Right.
And now all of a sudden you have a tragedy.
You could crank the heat up.
Well, you could crank the heat up, or you could raise the temperature. You could cause the system to operate in such a way that it becomes explosive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right now you're thinking that's only a nation state actor?
For something that big, I would never go on the record to say that it would be limited,
Right.
because you're really dealing with three types of attackers. You're dealing with people that are either nation state and are doing things for political or religious reasons, or you have attackers that they're in it for the money, and this is their line of work, air
Mm-hmm.
quotes. And then you have the third that is the most unpredictable and dangerous, which are those that might just want to watch the world burn.
The anarchist types.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is on your mind, and you want to make sure that you're working both in the IT area for prevention, keep it secure, focus on resilience if something happens, how do we move forward? And you're also thinking about the OT space,
Yep.
prevention. Do y- I mean,
I'm less focused on prevention there as I am resiliency,
mm-hmm,
and making sure we have the defenses and we're focused on what we need to focus on. And it carries over into how we do vulnerability management. With vulnerability management, traditionally IT teams look at CVSS 10s and 0 days, and it's all hands on deck. These are getting done. I have a strange hypothesis based on data that we've been collecting for 2 years, that exploits mean everything. So a CVSS 10 may or may not be your top priority. Your top priority is that which can be easily exploited, right? And
oh,
knowing what and where your critical infrastructure is, so you build a moat to be resilient around that. Because, and I'm actually in the process of trying to get data on this from colleagues at CISA, but we always hear about 0 days, or as one of my managers calls it, the celebrity vulnerabilities, right? What if I told you, this is a hypothesis, so bear with me. We always hear about exploits of 0 days. Well, of course, 0 days are exploited prior to any remediation or patch, because that's how they're discovered, as 0 days, unless you have bug bounties out there that are actually paid to disclose these to companies, right? What we're not told is, and there isn't a metric that I'm aware of, is how many 0 days are exploited post remediation being available.
mm-hmm,
My hypothesis is, while everybody shifts over here to deal with
mm-hmm,
the 0 day, the attacker is shifting over here to go after your Windows 7 that they know is still there.
Right.
And
Yeah. Go
and
ahead.
it's more of an opportunity for them. So by creating more of a think like an attacker, look at attack profiles with threat intel, understand who's targeting, like in healthcare, who's targeting healthcare and what are they going after. Well, now let's proactively start closing the door on those CVEs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a
It,
different spin on what we
so when
traditionally do.
you're talking about things that are being exploited, are you talking about the KEVs, the known exploited vulnerabilities? So that's what you're talking, and your hypothesis is that once a patch is announced to a 0 day, the attacker knows that as well. In a sense, the game is up for them. So while everyone's scrambling to patch those 0 days, the attacker says, "Well, I'm probably not going to get very lucky over there anymore. I'm gonna move. I'm gonna do something else." So it's almost like the game's over there. Yeah, you should probably patch it, but you can't lose sight of everything else. Is that kind of where?
Exactly. That's
Yeah,
exactly it.
yeah. Wow. So yeah, so the operational what do you think what would your best advice be to people out there who haven't been thinking about these the OT stuff, maybe haven't been focused on it? What would you think, what would your advice be? What should they start doing? How do you start in this area?
So I think it starts by doing some research. I mean, this is what I did in 2020. Digging into the area and understanding what encompasses the OT onion, as I call it, right? And and then looking at where your organization racks and stacks. What do you have from an industrial control system perspective? Understand who's taking care of it. What are
Yeah.
they doing? How is it secured? Who's managing it? What happens end of term or end of life, right? Could I gain access through a printer that has default credentials, right? Look at how vendors remote in. Um, the easiest paths in are default credentials, right? Through the things that we don't care about. There are security cameras that people buy that they may have bought them 25 years ago, but they're set it and forget it. Well, I can go online and create my own account for that security camera and see your service bay. And that's not a technical, hurdle. It's just knowing how to type. And those are the things that I think people forget about. And if you looked at your weaker default credentials, you understood what your core critical infrastructure is from what powers your facilities and
Mm.
powers everything that is mission critical, not just medical devices, but the industrial control systems. Start there.
This is fascinating. Completely fascinating to me. So I'm picturing the CISO or someone like yourself who wants to investigate. You go, where do you go? You go to facilities management? Like, is it some office? I'm picturing an office
Yeah.
like in the bowels of the hospital. And
Well,
I'm
you you
picturing
would
you
you would
walk
go
in
on
and
site.
they're going to say, "What do you want?" And I'm not even picturing the friendliest people in the world. I'm picturing them go, "What are you doing down here?"
In a lot of cases, they are very friendly because many times they've been raising the concern
Ah,
for years and nobody listens to them, or they've been trying to get budget and they can't. So they welcome the concern or they welcome the enthusiasm. I did a talk last year at the SANS ICS Security Summit, and I talked about how to build an OT security program in healthcare.
okay.
And it really, once you know the details of what you're looking at or what the gear is, what you're really doing from there is conducting a baseline assessment. What does reality look like? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And going and talking to people on site, having meetings, walking through just a base questionnaire, right? You can use the NIST CSF if you want. That's really detailed, or it can just be a handful of questions. We did a simplified questionnaire to just understand how's access management, how's access managed, what vendors do you have, how are they provisioned, how do you manage the equipment through the life cycle, what does patching look like, do you have a test environment,
It,
stuff like that.
you may be, could you be talking to people who are saying, well, we've been managing this from a building perspective, but no, we have not been managing the IT element of this, and we don't know anything about patching. We don't do that, and you guys haven't done it, and no one's been down here in 10 years. So yeah, this stuff needs IT attention. Yeah, could it possibly go like that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's where it becomes a prioritization, right? And then looking at your critical infrastructure, but also your critical sites. So what are the mission critical sites? And then starting to dissect those. What's the
Hmm.
gear you have? What version is? Is it supported? When was it last patched? What's it running? And you can find, I mean, facilities can find that out. Otherwise, there are systems that you can buy that help. And I'm not partial to one in particular because we're
Uh-huh.
actually in the process of changing systems,
Uh-huh.
but you can get, Clarity slash Medigate. You can get Nozomi. They have a really good product that I've seen. Palo, if you're a Palo shop and you have Palo firewalls, Palo might be an option. They bought Zingbox a few years ago.
Uh-huh.
Um, those are tools that can do passive scans that help you detect this. You, but to do it right, you want a dedicated team with people that they may not have a lot of they may not be IT veterans, but that they know that they're inquisitive and they can dig in and they can assess risk.
It's interesting though. You said it's a unique skill set. So you might not be able to sort of put somebody from your IT team on this project because it's a different animal. Is that correct?
It is a different animal, but let me just clarify that. I built my team from scratch.
Hmm.
My manager that I have over the team, he came from network and vulnerability management. So he has the technical chops. Other people, because if you're trying to find just people with engineering background or an ICS background, that is a chocolate covered unicorn with sprinkles. Like you're not going to find that. That just you really aren't. Right. And if you do, it's going to be really, really expensive. Right. But I took people GRC background. One came from our business office and finance group. Another person came from networking. Another person came from the patient side of things, and they just got immersed in the training. We provided training via
Hmm.
SANS,
Hmm.
and they just got immersed in it. Where I have people that came in with very little IT experience that are now experts in OT.
Really interesting. There could be a lot of once you sort of understand the OT infrastructure of the facilities, you might be dealing directly with those vendors at this point, sort of getting up
Yeah,
to speed on what version you're supposed to be on, and they may say, "Well, you guys haven't taken an upgrade in 6 years." Yeah, yeah, you're
100%. And
supposed to
then
upgrade.
and then you can eventually walk to here's critical sites or here's your critical systems, and you set standards where you must be at N-1 or N-2 all times.
Yeah. So I think of this. You tell me if I'm wrong. I think of this as a dusty. It's almost like when you're in between two areas and something falls through the cracks, right? So facilities had, the buildings are running. Facilities had it, but they weren't managing the IT side. IT for a long time hadn't really focused on this because facilities had it until now they're realizing, and from your talk people realizing that no, IT has to be managing this, but it's a different animal, so you need different skill set to manage this. But it's that dusty room that you'd better go check out, and you better go check it out because you're to your point, you have no idea. You don't want this to have a problem here, because if you think Epic going down is a problem, have your AC or heating go out, and then you'll have a real problem.
Mhm.
Am I getting this right?
You are 100%. And one thing I would add, so I mean, I'm not a career technologist. I got into cybersecurity via the risk door, and I spent 16 years in banking and financial services, running through asset management to operations to project management and then eventually in risk. And so I look at people who may have diverse backgrounds who want to learn. I can train what this is, right? But what I would add when making a case for why, a CISO might want to make this case of why they want this funded and
Hmm.
why they want to do this exercise is you could make a very strong case tying it back to the bottom line. People may not know what a controller is or an HMI, but they know if this facility brings in $1 million a day and the ICS fails and it's closed for 90 days, they just lost a very public $90 million.
You're talking about transferring patients. I mean, what a nightmare.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have patient safety issues come up if you're transferring hundreds of very ill people, some in the ICU. I mean,
Yep.
that's
Yeah. And then
I don't
you talk about the reputational risk. I mean, that it starts opening the door to all the other operational risk other than cyber risk,
yeah, yes,
right? And it's that iceberg below the surface that
yes,
you don't know. It's all that's why I said it's all the stuff you didn't know you had,
yeah.
but you really should care about.
Oh, really interesting. We're almost out of time, but what are your thoughts on how people are handling this? Let's say for the average health system, is this you think this is a problem they don't know about, or you think
I
like they got this?
I don't think they have it. I
Uh-huh.
think um, we're 3 years old and we're still working our way up and learning. It's a
Yeah.
constant evolution. Um, so right now, because I think health systems that do have some of these components in place, I would argue that there aren't a lot of best practices right now. There's probably just lesser degrees of bad, and it's because we're all learning. The challenge that's uphill with healthcare, and when we've gotten information, when we were building our playbook, we had CISA review our playbook back in 2021. So they gave us the thumbs up of how we're operationally executing. Um, their risk section chief out in Pennsylvania did that. But where I'm going with this is if you don't want to invest in a dedicated team, at least start looking beneath the surface of what's out there. And you don't have to be best in class right now. You just have to be aware. And then start down the road of how do we build resiliency. It's not about prevention anymore. It's
Yeah,
resiliency.
yeah, yeah. Start with an inventory, right? What do you
Start with
have?
an
What
inventory.
runs your
What
facility?
what do you have? Where is it? Who's managing it? And how do people get in?
Chris, absolutely fascinating. One more thing for CISOs to stress about, right? As
One
if they
more
needed
thing,
something else.
but I think here again, if we look at it from a proactive approach,
Yeah,
it's also one more opportunity to stay left of bang
yeah.
and to proactively harden the organization.
Right. And they always say you don't have to be perfect, but it's good to be maybe better than the crowd. Don't be the
Absolutely.
weakest target, right?
Absolutely. Be harder to kill. That's
Yeah.
that's it.
All right, Chris, that was absolutely incredible. I want to thank you so much for your time today. This is definitely valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it. It was great.